No guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Salutations, all you cognonauts, goblins, and ghouls. This is Exofathom, and I'm Ayla, your host for tonight's chit-chat about goblins. All things goblins. But first, I'm joined by my my one lovely co-host and my one super scary co-host. Happy early Halloween. How are we doing? This is awesome. I've got a goblin on the show.
Yeah, you know me. I'm hanging in there for the goblin. How you doing?
I'm good. Hey, can't complain. And Nick.
Hey, happy almost Halloween, everybody. How are you, Ayla?
Can't complain.
Good.
Yeah, I'm ready to talk goblins. I've been wanting to do this episode for weeks and just so many derailments, and now the big day is here. And to our listeners, it might be a short one. This is kind of, maybe I'll start out with this thought, which was that for as clear of a picture in my mind that I have about goblins, and pre Harry Potter, pre Lord of the Rings, it's astonishing to me that I have such a clear image of a goblin in my mind without any story to really tether to it. And I'm curious if that's familiar to you too, both of you.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, I ran into the same thing with the fairy episode where it's like, well, what do you define a fairy as? It can be defined as a lot of different things, and kind of becomes like a sort of catch-all descriptor for some sort of creature. But goblins, that's a difficult one because, I mean, I probably heard the word goblin more than I ever saw images of it, because I don't know if I remember a specific image of a goblin, except for maybe in Spider-Man. We had like Hobgoblin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, how about you?
Well, I'm trying to remember the first time I heard goblin. And I think it was like, I had to go back to like World of Warcraft. So I have like a very I feel like neutral feel about goblins. Like they're almost like joke characters in a weird way.
Right.
I never have taken them as like evil or bad, but just something like comic relief of the
universe or something.
Yeah, folklore, things like that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't in my mind immediately associate goblins with something terrifying or dangerous. And yet at the same time, they can be. So and thanks, Nick, for sort of, agreeing with me on the whole idea of like, how is it that we have this in our mind without like a really specific go-to goblin? And you're right, like our last episode was on fairies, and I thought Nick did a great job of sort of presenting the lore, and it's a great episode if you need to go check it out. But so just to start off, for those of you who don't know what a goblin is, the definition is just that it's a small, grotesque, or monstrous creature that appears in folklore of multiple European cultures. Interestingly enough, I found that there was some goblin lore in Zimbabwe and Japan, which we'll come to later. But to just kind of get our minds on the same page, goblins in current day, apparently Griphook in Harry Potter was a goblin. And I believe, he's the goblin that Harry meets on his first visit to Gringotts in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And he was sort of, magical and powerful and like withholding something from Harry, if I remember.
The goblins run the banks in
Oh, is that what
Harry
it
Potter.
was?
Yeah.
Oh, how funny. Yeah, because well, there's forget. Well, anyway, there's some attributes that we can talk about goblins later, but yeah, I don't know how I'd feel with a goblin running my bank. That would be scary.
Well, there's a little bit of the same thing in World of Warcraft where goblins are like merchants, more capitalistically
Interesting.
orientated, where they're like, even when their taglines is like, "Time is money, friends," and you kind of go on after buying or selling whatever you want to sell. But
Oh,
they're like
that's
pirate merchants versus more, I don't know, like systematic, like more generally accepted merchants. If you know what I mean?
yeah, no, I totally get you. And it is interesting that there's sort of that like capitalist or merchant alignment across two different realms, so to speak. And apologies if you heard that splashing sound, ladies and gentlemen. I have a flower pen and I was taking notes, and somehow the flower hooked onto the tea bag in my cup and flung it across the room along with like half of my cup of water, which I don't know how that's possible. So I am just working in a
Those
puddle.
those damn goblins.
I mean, I kind of think I have my suspicions. Now
Those
here's something else I didn't know. The orcs in Lord of the Rings are apparently goblins. Now, Nick, you're perking up there. Is that accurate or is that like
Uh,
inflammatory?
No, I mean, okay, so there's the goblins that are in like The Hobbit, if you remember the Goblin King,
Mm-hmm.
who lives underground. But the Urukai are distorted elves. So you wouldn't technically, I guess they once they turn, they're considered in the goblin family. But yeah, the orcs and the goblins, it depends on which lore you're following. Because in some lores they might be, but in Tolkien's lore, there's a distinction about the orcs sort of being contorted elves.
I suspected as much. Yeah. And I can see you're right. Like they're kind of in goblin territory. They've got the hideous look, they're scary.
They live in caves and underground. And,
They live in caves and underground. Yeah. And another attribute is that they can be like human-like, but they're obviously not human, which I think is also really interesting, is that goblins kind of like humans, but not quite. I had a Halloween Town goblin, but I don't know. I've never seen that movie. Have you guys seen that movie?
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Or Disney Channel, I think.
It's been a very long time for me. I would
I'll
need some
have to-
refreshers.
Yeah. Well, apparently they had a goblin. He was the laid back friend. Let's see. So he's a goblin, but changes to human form by another character. So nothing special there. But you also see goblins in Eternals, which I think is a video game. Mike, do you know about Eternals? Or maybe that's wrong.
It's a movie.
Yeah, the only Eternals I know was it was a Marvel movie I never saw. It was just the whole aesthetic was
Little off.
opposite of what the original creator intended. But I never saw it, so I don't know if it's in Eternals or not, to answer your original question.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a picture of it. I just looked up like goblins in movies and things. And so the Eternals goblin, little human-like in that it's bipedal. It has a hand with a thumb. But this
Usually
one is
real short,
green.
right?
I don't know. I can't judge the height on this particular one. But yeah, usually they are just a little bit shorter than your regular human. This one's outfitted with like artillery and such, so a little bit deviant from classical goblin aesthetic, but close.
Nice.
Yeah, close. There's also a movie which I've mentioned before, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend The Cabin in the Woods. It's a horror film. And it's kind of like it starts off like one of those crappy teen scream movies, and then it totally shifts. And
Isn't Sig in that movie Sigourney Weaver?
is she? Yes.
She's like the queen of the horror genre because of
Yes.
her role in it. Yeah, that whole movie's a love letter to horror movies as a genre.
Oh,
Definitely recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. And without spoiling too much, I will say that there is a goblin in that movie. And this particular goblin does look short. It is also green and grotesque. So I'm noticing a theme here. Now, I think we're all familiar with the Green Goblin. Now, I'm not a big Spider-Man buff, but I was interested about sort of the lore behind Green Goblin. Now, I know that it's a chemical solution that turns Norman Osborn into the Green Goblin. But is there more to it than that?
Well, I think go ahead and like.
There's a like an interesting theme with it's orcs really, but since you connected orcs and goblins together, I'll work off of that. But the whole turning green thing is a sort of corruption. So within World of Warcraft, the orcs are originally sort of their religion is more based in shamanism, very similar to like Native American lore type stuff. But then they find this thing called fell magic. And if you practice fell magic, which is like sucking the souls out of people, much like closer to Satanism, demonic type stuff, then they become green in their skin color. So it takes the motif and theme of corruption as a whole. Green Goblin, his humanity is corrupted after he takes the chemical thing, so he becomes green. Yeah, in the movies, he has that arguments with himself. You get the split personality thing within the mirror. Mirrors are very important when it comes to terms with compartmentalism. If you don't believe me, just watch The Shining.
Yeah. Yep, it's a good movie. I'm just cracking up because I'm loving what you're saying, but I'm looking at the screen.
And it's horrifying.
Yes.
But yeah, that sort of corruption comes out when you start to play with the dark arts. And Green Goblin is just another example of that corruption where this unnatural chemical came into play and turned him into a goblin, took the humanity from him and replaced it with something else.
Well, and I like that you talked a little bit about the color because, like the Wicked Witch of the Wizard of Oz movie, also green. And you have a lot of instances where the color green is associated with corruption or jealousy or evil or witchery. And I just thought that was really interesting because green is also a calming aesthetic.
The color they put in psychiatric wards
to calm people down. Yeah, it's supposed to be a soothing color. You've got green spaces. People like greenery now, and they have all the plants in the world in their homes. On Pinterest, you have the earthy aesthetic, and so it's just interesting because green has had a bad rap, and yet it's also this beautiful thing. Which, if it's tethered to witchcraft, I could see it being like two sides of the same coin kind of thing.
Yeah, but it draws green or forest, right? Forests are very or jungles. Both are very dangerous environments for human beings. So it sort of makes sense that we have this motif of green as being something dangerous or corrupting. Or if you spend enough time in a jungle or wilderness, you're going to come across a predator that is physically stronger than you.
Yeah. Nick, what do you think?
Also the concept of envy. If you think about the idea of being green with envy, if you think about the way goblins are sort of interpreted, especially in high fantasy, they tend to be cave dwellers that hoard treasure. You have the Wicked Witch of the West, who's green, and she covets sort of Dorothy and is envious of her sisters. So yeah, something there too. It's that twisting, the corruption, like Mike was talking about, and I think it one of the origins of that is probably jealousy.
Yeah, and it starts out with the Wicked Witch of the West, right? Yeah, she's originally just a good witch. She's like the other witches. but something corrupts her along the way. Yeah, and like you were saying, that cave dwelling type things. There's something, I guess, that can pull a human or an elf or whatever spiritual being into the cave that then corrupts them. That when they come out of it, come out properly corrupted. It's like I guess more generally, if you took a trip to the underworld and came out, but came out as the wrong thing. You came out very much affected by it rather than overcoming your demons, overcoming your goblins.
It could be a sort of a disgust factor for illness as well. If you think of people who are queasy or sick, they it's said to have green in the face.
Gangrene.
Gangrene, definitely.
Yeah.
So-
In fact, so I'll just skip ahead briefly. Some of the earliest, I have a section here called "Is There an OG Original Goblin?" And it was just referencing the fact that some of the more popular origin stories came out of France, in the area of the Pyrenees, and it was around the 14th century that it started to really spread throughout Europe as mythology there. And I thought about, 14th century, you've got the pandemic of both bubonic plague and pneumonic plague. So lots of death. And yeah, it does make sense that the color green would be associated with sort of like, necrotic flesh, death, corpses. They turn a certain color that's like, it's like that. And,
faces contort, bodies contort.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that like disgust factor comes up. And I mean, it's kind of interesting if that's what was going on at the time. And if the lore came out of that, that is kind of an interesting like mass human response to something so tragic.
Yeah, and it begs the question if the sick are envious of the healthy, regardless of whether it be physical sickness or mental sickness or spiritual sickness.
Oh yeah. If you read Boccaccio's Decameron, I think that's it. Or is it Charles Chaucer's Canterbury Tales? It might be the Canterbury Tales. One of those two.
You're saying a bunch of words I don't know.
Well, sorry. It's an old ass book that was after some crazy shit happened. But
I
it's
understand now.
but it's hilarious because it's like Old English if Jerry Springer was in Old English, because it just is all these short stories about people acting out in the face of like really terrible stuff. And so, yeah, you're right. Like I can see on like that mental or spiritual or social level, sort of this concept of the goblin manifesting in all kinds of interesting ways. And it would be convenient to have sort of like a mischievous character to kind of blame for certain malevents, maybe.
You're talking now about either gremlins or Mephistopheles, like the benevolent devil sort of thing, I feel like. But I think that gets out of goblins.
Yeah, we get a little bit later probably, but just in the sense of like tying in what you were saying about the color green and like the events sort of bringing that stuff up.
I think also too notably, or something to note, is the choice to accept the corruption. Because in a lot of the lore, I'm thinking of like people who end up being the corrupted or the goblin. It's usually by their own volition. It's usually by their own choice. Sometimes they're a victim of the circumstance, but it's usually that envy or that greed or that covetousness that they willingly go into and then thus sort of bear the ill effects of.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. He's not necessarily a goblin, but he sort of turns into one. And it's all by his choice. He decides to go into the mountains. He decides to stay into the caves.
I love that.
And then he distorts and becomes this monster.
As much as I hate Lord of the Rings, I wish to disagree. Gollum is a victim of addiction. The ring being a symbol of power, being a symbol of a drug, I feel like that people who are not people or entities that are not strong enough to withstand that power within the Tolkien lore end up being victims of addiction, and so
Interesting take.
that degrades them down. Because I think Golem was, what was he beforehand? A hobbit, or what was he?
He was
Smeagol.
Or Smeagol.
he was river folk. He was a sort of an off version of the Hobbit, but he makes a choice to kill somebody to get the ring. So I mean, I think he still makes a choice.
Yeah,
at
that
some
one
point.
choice that leads down the rabbit hole. That makes.
Mm.
I was
Well,
going to draw to where I agree with you is that it's like a choice in picking the dark side. In World of Warcraft, I forget the warlock's name, and so many Warcraft fans are going to be mad at me, but one of the original orcs that pick fell magic over shamanic magic
mhm.
goes like whole hog in it, just loves it, and decides that fell magic, this thing that corrupts the orcs, that makes them evil, that sort of turns their skin green. That's the way to go because that's the more powerful magic. But it takes so much from your soul that you're no longer an orc. You're something else.
This is such a
Entirely
repeating
different.
theme. Well, I'm thinking of like Star Wars, it's kind of Sithy.
Yeah. It's the same thing. If you dive into your passions too much and you can't come out of it, if you give in to the full power of the dark side,
Mhm.
then you can pick up the powers of the the deep Sith, but it's not really what a rational being would want.
Mm.
And that's the corruption factor, right? You give into your
Yeah.
emotion, you give into your hatred, you give into it for the power that it gives you, but it ends up corrupting you entirely.
Yeah. And I kind of like kind of maybe a middle ground between the two, right? Where like taking the Gollum character, for example, there was the first choice to give in, and then there's the pull of the addiction, and then there's an opportunity to get out and a choice to go deeper. And it's it's kind of interesting because it starts to play on like free will and choice. It's playing on, do the things we do define us, or do we define us despite our inability to do the things that we want to do? Like lots of
Mhm.
stuff in there. And I think there's a reason that these kinds of ideas and characters replicate throughout our mythology and our stories, even today, because it's like, I don't know, it hits something that's really core to existing, maybe.
Yeah, I mean it's very easy to give into the dark side of things, like revenge, power, that sort of stuff. There's like I think it's in the animated series where there's a fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Maul.
I need to get on these
And
animated Star Wars. I have not seen any of them, so you're making me want to watch them right now.
the animated ones are great. Clone Wars. I think Bad Batch had one. Don't quote me on this. I'm bad at this stuff, but I've picked up the stories as they all come along. But there's a fight between the two where Maul tells Obi-Wan that he should have given to the dark side, that it would have given him so much power. And Obi-Wan replies that you don't understand that the light it's easier to give into the dark side than it is to build the strength in the light side to get the full range of powers of the light side. Now the gray Jedi have a wider breadth of powers, but it's not as in depth of either side. So you
Yeah.
get a strength in a different way. But this sort of argument it becomes very interesting because yeah, it is easier in real life. It's very easy to give into your emotions. There have been many times in my life where I wanted to fly off the handle and just give in, but they're like, yeah, give in to the fell magic, become a green skinned goblin, so to say. But it's there's a not virtue. There's something about the power of like stoicism, of being able to abstain.
Yeah, well, and I think as you were talking, it makes me think also of the concept of like a jack of all trades, master of none, right? Same with like the Sith and the Jedi. If you go, all in on one side, there's lots of drawbacks. You might change completely, but you'll enjoy the heights of the power available there. Just like if you were to be a master at like a craft or something, you specialize in that one thing. Whereas you could be like the Grey Jedi, or probably not an approximate association, but you could like be a non-specializing Jedi or whatnot. And
Yeah,
you're not going to go too far in either side, but you won't be as powerful. And there's something interesting about that concept too.
yeah, no, most definitely, because there's definitely an emotional high you get when you go full dark side. Turn yourself into a monster, you become a Sith.
Go Goblin mode.
Yeah, go Goblin mode, exactly.
And we'll talk about Goblin mode later too.
But there is something that feels better. It's not in the moment, but it lasts longer, where you feel much more disciplined when you don't go full Goblin mode. When you I don't know, hold back or stay to your virtues. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
well, then you're like
something
Frodo. Yeah, well, then you're like Frodo, and you're like the main character that we're rooting to say no to the power of the ring or something like that. Because he
not
starts
to,
to turn, and he's like, I can't.
yeah, or like to get back to the addiction analogy, there's something very nice about seeing somebody overcome, like go through recovery, get over their addiction problems with drug addiction, and become a different person, right? There's something so great about seeing that versus seeing somebody give in to their desires and the impetus of indulgence. There's something very special, but it's hard to describe.
Nick, you seem very thoughtful over there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the Primrose Path when you guys are talking about, which is
What
sort
is
of this.
the Primrose Path?
It's sort of like a metaphor for what you guys are talking about. I think it's this idea that you come to a fork in a road, and we've talked about this before, but for our audience, you come to a fork in a road, and you can go in one direction that looks very perilous and arduous, and you go to the other direction, and it's this sort of pristine journey, this pristine walkway. See it as like this garden path, or a primrose path, which just means a path lined with roses. But the concept is that though the primrose path looks appealing, it in the end could lead to your calamity, because in sort of like the storytelling framework, usually the path that looks the most appealing, the most forgiving, tends to bring the hero to our closest to ruin. Whereas if they had just taken the path that looked a little bit more difficult, they could have circumnavigated the danger.
Go for it, Ayla.
I was just going to say, this is also true for White Elephant. The prettiestly packaged gift is quite often the worst thing you could have picked.
That's true.
That's true.
Applicable.
I have two things to say. One, I thought we were gonna go down some sort of thing as like every rose has its thorn.
Oh.
You're gonna start singing to me.
I'm not gonna sing Poison.
Every cowboy sees a say it. And then what was the second thing? Most pathings. There is something that I have found in my own life, taking a primrose path with respect. How do I want to describe this? With respect to love, where every time those roses stung me, there's a little bit of high that I got, where it pushes you down the path, and it looks really great. But you're right. At the end, the main character of the story, which should be you, if we're talking about your life, ends up in some sort of dire straits, which is not worth all of the little thorn highs that you felt walking past the roses.
Or the sweet waft of the scent that,
Exactly.
accompanied you along the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ew. Sorry. I'm just
Well, I
thinking
mean,
about
roses
this
smell
analogy.
nice.
Okay,
Well,
I know
where does the
I know
smell
what you
come
meant.
from,
You could take the rose
Where-
path or the fart
where-
path. How about that?
Yeah, where's the smell coming from, kid? What are you talking?
Back to the goblins. But it was true. You guys are hitting on some great stuff, and I can't wait to kind of bring this full circle a little bit later, because this is something that was kind of in my mind the whole time I was researching this episode. And so just to kind of talk a little bit about the goblin like aesthetic or whatnot. We did talk about green, the color and the association. One other thing that I had brought up was reptiles. They also have green skin. And so I wonder too if there's sort of like this, you talked about like the nature element and sort of how like snakes, they would have been that would probably have been death in most instances, to be bit by a poisonous snake back in the 14th century. So definitely a symbol of danger. Let's see here. But and this is going to lead to a joke, which Nick, I forgot to tell you to cue your scary X-Files music, because I had this thought about goblins, which are shorter than humans and green and scary. And then I thought about little green men. And I thought to myself, could goblin be another word for 14th century UFO pilots? I'm sorry. I've seen him do this on our companion show, Screen Time Continuum, and I just can't stop laughing every time.
We're all amused.
Mhm.
But also, yeah, like, do you think that it could be in the same vein? I know this is totally out there and ridiculous, but indulge me.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. Did you read about goblin vehicles? Because I feel like there might be something associated with goblins and vehicles, but I'm not 100% sure. I might just be thinking of Green Goblin and his hoverboard. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any sort of like a folklore precedent that goblins ride any sort of vehicle.
Well, I think I was just thinking about the fact that we associated, extraterrestrials with green and of a certain size, and that goblins are the same thing. And I just thought to myself,
are you saying that aliens live in our cave systems?
I've heard other people say that. Hit that music.
Maybe. No.
It's the cave systems of our mind.
Ooh.
They lay in the dark. And it's not them that are envious of us. It is we that are envious of them.
Oh, dang. We came out of the caves, and now in the back of our mind, we want to return or demonize that existence, maybe.
Freud would have enough to say about that. Yeah.
There'd be a field day with Freud.
See, all the man wants to do is crawl back in his mother's womb.
Oh, no. No, good stuff. So, okay. That ends my little crazy thought.
Hold on.
Oh,
Speaking of which, going back to the original Alien film, the central room, according to the director, and I think maybe the writer, was called the womb wound. A womb room.
You mean the one where the alien is busting out of what's her face?
Yeah, well, so the face sucker has been known as a symbol for how do I put this in the proper way? What's the word? When unconsented facial action. We just call it that.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that stuff going on, but with respect to the womb, the thing where the main room, if I get my R's correct, fucking speech therapy. that was known to the director and the writer as the womb room. So you're like caves can be a good symbol for wombs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, no, absolutely. I think yeah. Well, one, I have to watch that movie again. It's been far too long. And then second, yeah, I think the idea of like caves and then a goblin,
It's like
like
Rosemary's Baby, right?
right. Well, yeah, and
It's regression. It's
Hmm.
regression. It's this idea that we'd want to crawl back into the cave and be dark and sort of revert back to our sort of basic nature, which is much
Interesting.
more animalistic than our social nature.
But you could also
goblinistic.
crawl. Yeah, but you could also crawl back into the womb and progress, right? You can also get there and change yourself in a way and come out of it.
What, like sensory depth tanks or something?
Sure, yeah. That's an adult version of a womb, if I'd never heard one.
I was just thinking, like, I just had a visual of somebody actually trying to crawl back into a womb. It's horrifying. I horrified myself.
I think
Mama, I'm coming back with you with a knife.
Oh, no.
I think in the stories, it would be like the hero having to be, tended to by the hermit that finds them along the way, injured or something like that. So there is always that rejuvenation idea.
Luke and Yoda, right? He goes there for training, and his house is. You can argue that Yoda's house is a womb, where this Jedi Master goes from, or this Jedi Knight goes to a Jedi Master.
I like this concept of there being sort of like an externalization of the womb that represents rejuvenation or some sort of transformational chrysalis kind of thing.
Sure. Same thing with Skynet. Skynet is a womb as well. That's why Sarah Connor yells at the main creator. It's like, you have no idea to birth something. But in reality, that's her hubris coming out, because the creator of this AI tech does know. That's why the whole thing of fate where you can't stop Skynet exists.
Mhm.
You can't stop a mother from birthing something, so to say.
I think there's a threshold though, right? Because if a butterfly stays in its chrysalis too long, it's dead. If you stay in the cave womb for too long, you turn into a goblin.
I thought you could say you turned into Jeffrey Dahmer. I was like, yeah,
well, probably pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's true. No, it's very right. Like, you turn into the psycho character. Right? What's his name? The Bates, whatever. Yeah, no, you have to get out of the womb. You can't stay there forever. And no matter how many wombs you get into on your journey, you still have to be birthed again. And it goes into the notion of rebirth, the phoenix symbol, or the going into the underworld and coming out. However you want to try to symbolize it, it's a moment of rest and learning and expansion of the self, but you have to get out of there to get back into the real world. Otherwise, you will die or become corrupted. I think corruption is worse than the death.
Well, yeah, and this is good stuff because the next section on goblin attributes, right? There's some surface level stuff. So we've covered mischievousness, maliciousness. They've been called like vengeful, greedy. Some have magical abilities. Some can shapeshift. They've universally been described as troublemakers. Either they're simple tricksters and mischievous like immature children, or they're malevolent evildoers that are dangerous to human beings. But what I did read that was interesting was that it said that they can have characteristics of spirits rather than beings existing in the physical world. So they share similarities with ghosts and with demons as associated with some Christian teachings and lore. So as I read that, I thought to myself, like, so are they interdimensional? Back to those UFOs, man.
Like the
You're really trying hard.
Yeah, you can't push for it. Sorry.
If I had my finger on that button, it'd be going off. Like,
well, it's a good thing you
minute. I'm
It would sound like
We'll get
like
copyright
a
struck.
radio channel.
Yeah. Well, that kind of reminds me of this sort of preternatural world, right? The fairies not
Mhm.
really being angelic beings or demonic beings, but in this sort of like middle category.
Mhm.
Goblins also being sort of in that middle category too, where they don't necessarily have to be evil.
Yeah.
There's a sort of spectrum there.
What's interesting too, within like to jump to a different lore, the Warhammer world, goblins are the south are self I'm drinking too much. Self-sacrificial. So they are like when you launch like a trebuchet within like the goblin group or the orc. Actually, they're part of the orcs.
Wait, what's a
When
trebuchet?
a trebuchet is a medieval artillery weapon that looks like a giant slingshot, basically.
Oh, cool. Okay.
It's like shaped. Fucking, where's my camera?
I
Like
saw
this.
Braveheart. I have a
There's a little bit
visual.
of thing. There's like
You've seen
there's
Game
a
of
trigger
Thrones.
that's released and
Yeah.
it's thrown. It goes flown forward. But the weapon in Warhammer is not like a giant rock or something. It's a goblin with a bunch of explosives on their back. So they're almost the self-sacrificial thing. They have a like a Deadpool-esque humor mocking view of the world.
They're also kind of, well, in certain aspects of lore. Again, we can't really pin any one goblin down, but there are mentions of them being closer to a hive mind as well. That they act as a large, sort of like an ant colony would. You have the king or the queen at the top, and then you have the grunts. So it would make sense that the grunts are very expendable in that sort of universe because there's probably billions of them. And so, strapping some explosives on one of your grunts and hurling them over a wall is probably okay.
There's
Total goblin activity.
Yeah.
There's a interesting religious aspect that we could argue about. Like, what is the religion of goblins, if that's true?
We shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
We shouldn't do that. There is no way you can't offend somebody with that conversation.
Right? Because you get into the aspects of expendability, I understand. But
Mhm.
no, you're right. It's interesting where there's like where it could be a hive mind, and at the lowest level of the grunts, that's just what grunts do, man. Even you can even argue in modern military structures. Like if you ever talk to a soldier and you're like, are you worried about war? And it's like a proper frontline soldier, they tell you to like fuck off. Like, yeah, we want war. We want, that's what we do. That's where we go. That's how we operate.
Mhm.
But you talk to anybody else outside of that sort of ecosystem, they won't understand it at all. So I wonder if there's something similar within goblin lore somewhere where these grunts are happy to expend themselves for a higher cause.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And, again, it's making me think that the depiction of orcs in Tolkien's universe kind of makes sense a little bit because I can see that sort of hive mind expendability among their activities in that movie. But I'm going to leave that. And, thinking about other types of goblins in other cultures, or I guess it's more about like stories and figures that have similarities with goblins. Now in Zimbabwe, the goblin was kind of like maybe not a scapegoat, but like if you had a child that was born with some sort of complication, they would often blame it on the goblin for impregnating the mother and setting things awry at the get-go. So you kind of just like blame it on the goblin. But in Japan, now I don't know if this is just because they're in the mountains, but I read about the mountain goblins of Japan, but they called them the Tengu. And now the Tengu lore is really vast. I mean, just type in Japanese Tengu mythology and you'll have so much to read and learn about. But so just a little short snippet, they're either this sort of like older looking character. I'm sure you've seen the masks where they have like this really long nose and like the open mouth that's like kind of smiling. And sometimes the Tengu, it's like a crow or a falcon, and it has wings, a beak, claws of a bird, but the body of a man. And originally the Tengu, like one of the oldest stories about them, they started out as like dogs that came shooting out of the sky, and their bark was like really monstrous. And then when they landed, they started to sort of like evolve. And what's really cool is that one of the Tengu leaders was said to have been the master of the martial arts, of like this.
Those are aliens. Those are aliens from the Sirius system.
I mean, hit that,
Dogs
smash that
falling
music
from the sky. Yeah, come on. Yeah.
No, I know. I was like, I'm gonna have to do an entire Tengu episode because super fascinating, and the artistry from like some of the old texts about them. It's just really fascinating, and also they give me like Thoth vibes, like there's a lot of stuff that I'm just like, this is feeling very familiar to some other mythology, and I love it. I just love it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Okay, so that's the Tengu. I'm just looking because we've touched on a lot of this stuff. Oh, okay. This is kind of cool. There is some out there who believe that goblins are more malevolent, that they weave nightmares out of gossamer and insert them into the ear of a sleeping human, stealing human women and children and hiding them away underground, or stealing human babies and changing them with goblin babies or changelings, as I think you talked about in the fairy episode.
Mm-hmm.
I also read that a goblin smile is said to curdle blood, and a laugh will sour milk and cause fruit to fall from trees. And I just think it's kind of interesting to just think about like where these kind of ideas come from. Like sour milk. Okay.
If I was a goblin, I would just go around supermarkets and laugh. Just to destroy the big corporate supermarket system.
No, just stand outside like a Starbucks and just start souring all the lattes.
Just get people back to local coffee shops. Get people back to local like bodegas. Like,
yeah. You're a goblin with an agenda. But I thought it was interesting. Like, the milk's gone bad.
Yeah, this might tie in closer with the Fae or in the fairies. We talk about the Seelie and the Unseelie, right, from the Scottish tradition, the Unseelie being sort of these evil fairies, which kind of reminds me a little bit of goblins. So maybe goblins were part of the Unseelie tribe, but then they also have to talk about fairies, and then the Persian Peri, right? Mm-hmm. And the Peris opposite were the Divs, which were also Jinn were considered to be part of that. And Jinn, from our episode, if you remember, really loved decay. And they were very into living in areas that were full of disease, pestilence, and decay. So there might be some tie-ins there that, goblins coming from this sort of Div folklore that, perhaps they are the personification of that decay, just like the Jinn would make their homes in places that were putrid.
Right. No, I think you're totally onto something. I think that, again, given the timing of everything, and everything that happened, you have to imagine that people are witnessing this horrible stuff, and they probably don't have all the tools to explain it in like a sensible way. And so it does seem like, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's like, it seems like you're giving your power away to be like, oh, well, there's goblins out there that are doing this kind of stuff. But I can also see how, like, if you're powerless against natural forces, then it's just like, you know what? It's the goblins, say a little, I don't know, burn some witch hazel, And that was the weird thing, is I never found any like antidotes to goblin activity. And I think that would be kind of interesting. I'm sure there's stuff out there, like old wives' tales that they used to tell, but I couldn't find any.
I mean, if they're anything like fairies, which they probably are a part of the same sort of class, you can think of bread, fresh bread, iron charms, things like that probably would be good
Like
wards.
ward offs.
Yeah, to ward off goblins.
Yeah.
Also, notoriously in a lot of folklores, goblins are photophobic, so they don't like light. That tends to be something, since they live in caves and all, they're not really accustomed to sunshine.
Yeah, and you're making me think about like some of the depictions of like vampires. When the vampires again succumb to their vampireness and they lose their humanness, they end up, in movies and stuff, they end up turning into this goblin-looking kind of character.
Or the Wendigo.
Or the Wendigo. I was this close to doing a Wendigo episode today, but
they're creepy.
I'll work on it. I don't want to be too scared.
It's super scary. Yeah, but the Wendigo is a sort of, a distorted human that it gets its, monstrosity from excess and sort of being degrading the human life. So lots of, a lot of these they would fall under, I forget what they call them, creatures of darkness. So creatures of darkness all hold this sort of trait that they've been corrupted and twisted into these sort of dark things, like a Wendigo, like a goblin, like all of these, like a vampire. They all get corrupted by the darkness.
Now, do you think there's a goblin that could resist the darkness once becoming a goblin? Or do you think once the transmutation has happened, you're sort of stuck in that zone?
I mean, as far as like the folklore goes, probably stuck as is, but within your own journey, of course, there's always room for redemption.
So there's one of the only interesting things that I found. Oh God, this is so embarrassing to admit. So I may or may not have. I'm allegedly I watched a lot of the Vampire Diaries. All right.
Oh, okay.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
You were sleeping in the room of
market
somebody
research,
else.
okay.
Yeah.
Look, I don't want to say where I was or where I wasn't. All I know is that I may or may have not watched some Vampire Diaries. All right.
Okay.
It may or may not have been on my next Netflix account.
Listen,
It may not be on my keep watching list.
We don't talk about these things amongst friends. I thought we were in a safe space. I thought we were.
So sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. So let it out. Let it all out. Everything out. We're good.
But allegedly, one of the interesting notions, was one of the alleged notions of a Ripper, where you have a vampire who's sort of a Ripper is a vampire that will kill any human to satisfy their own lust for blood, i.e. like a goblin, like they're completely corrupted. But then there's vampires that are like reformed or like going through like Blood Anonymous or something, where they try to keep everything they try to keep a little bit more grounded, and the key switch to this is switching on and off your humanity, which is why I asked the question if you thought that if you're completely corrupted within these lores, then or like once you've made it to like a goblin, once you've made it to a vampire, once you've made it to something like that, if you're stuck there, you can switch it on and off at will, or if you can come back if there's ever an arc for redemption. And Vampire Diaries, I feel like, is one of the only things that play with this sort of storyline, I guess.
Yeah, I think redemption's hugely important for sure. I think it's probably more metaphysically important. I think like if I'm thinking in Germanic sort of cautionary tales in which these things were written back in the medieval era, I think they were probably being pretty literal with the idea of like goblins never return, because it's a cautionary tale. But if we're looking at it through like a modern lens, then I think it's more important for us to have this like meta narrative around redemption, that even going to the farthest steps, you can still climb your way out of it, because it's important for us as humans.
Now that's a thing I would love to see in the Lord of the Rings. Imagine a storyline of like the redemption of Smeagol. They're going to start to like rewrite all the lore and do a bunch of bullshit, and they're going to go fuck everything off the cliff.
Yeah.
Then make something at least interesting.
Like, well, and see, this is an interesting sort of question too. And what do you guys think? Because I do see this happening a lot more, and I'm wondering, is the sort of redemption of the villain?
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah, I wonder what you guys think about that, because I wonder, like, is it? I don't have any personal issues with it, but I wonder if a villain sometimes just needs to be a villain.
Honestly,
yeah, go ahead. No, that was it.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that as we continue to see the erosion of free will through certain disciplines, we're going to see more of a like villain backstory kind of situation. I mean, right? Because
victims of circumstance.
Victims of circumstance, right? Exactly. And and I only mentioned that because I was listening to this interview with Annika Harris. Is that what her name is? I think that's her name. She wrote this book named Consciousness, and she just interviews a lot of like physicists and AI folks and computer scientists, and she talks to them. Oh, and neuroscientists, and she talks to them about sort of the way that our brains process information and some of the experimentation that has certain predictability that is uncomfortable and is chipping away at what we think of as free will. Now she's thinking like we don't have it at all, which I'm like, lady, but she also, I think, takes a grain of salt where she just isn't really sure like what reality is anymore. And this is like a whole other story.
Yeah.
Can't even get into it.
Too deep. We can't.
Way too deep. Way too deep.
No, because we can't do that. Free will versus determinism. That'll be your next episode, because that's a long episode by itself.
I will fight you about free will versus determinism.
I know. I know.
We can't just upon.
Oh no, it gets even better, because then it becomes a question of like, is consciousness fundamental to reality, and like time and space are emergent from reality? These are like really subtle distinctions that it took me forever for me to understand what she was talking about. And then I'm like, oh, freakity freak, because then it makes sense. And anyway,
I would say we burn all of the scientists with the witches and bundle of sticks. That's what we do. We burn them all.
Man. Oh my God. You're so Hungarian.
So deep. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, yeah, no, it's some freaky stuff. But Nick,
harkening back to the original question, yes,
right.
You need villains to be villains, but there's a difference between a villain, an anti-hero, and a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to grade those out. There's something like this is why I love Daredevil so much. Daredevil is a hero, but always verges on the border of anti-hero because he's battling with his fate. Compare that to somebody who is his arch villain, like a Bullseye, right? A Bullseye is you can form him to be an anti-hero because of the trauma he's went through, but he's a proper villain. He has a certain set mode. And even Punisher is a proper villain, but in Marvel Comics he's a hero because he's an anti-hero. But he, like, if the line you draw is killing people, regardless of if they're criminals, if they're horrible people, or if they're good people, if that's the line you draw, he's a proper villain too. So, like, playing with this areas of morality becomes extremely important in storytelling and folklore, just as the same as like goblins and stuff.
Yeah. I'd co-sign that. Yeah, Nick, your question. We got to get into ethics, morality, free will, space and time, reality. Like all this is important to first discuss before we can answer your question. But I would also
need a being of time book, Nick, from you. I need a set of definitions. A
all right.
systematic.
Exactly.
Describe
I'll
your
hand out,
reality to me, and then
little
maybe I can make a.
leaflets.
I was just wondering if
film
we
of
could get a
myself.
mustache twirling villain back. That's all.
Oh
Ah!
no, we still here.
Well, I
Look,
will
look.
say-
I'll be the mustache twirling villain for you.
There we go.
There it is.
Yeah,
there we go.
I'm gonna rob the
That's cool with
train.
me
The great
sometimes.
train
Yeah.
robbery is for me. I want the gold and all of the
There we go.
money.
I miss that.
Brilliant,
That's so nostalgic.
brilliant. It
It's
is.
like, it's so retro.
It's like
Yeah.
Wario. But I was thinking too, Mike, as you were talking about like anti-hero and hero, I do wonder because Nick, your question about villains, it's like also about heroes because you can't have an epic hero without an epic villain. And I think about like Kilgrave in the Jessica Jones series. I think you guys mentioned him on Screen Time, and like what an epic video or villain. I hated that guy, but I wanted him to be defeated, but I also wanted him to at least last 2 seasons. He was so good. And I don't know what that is. I wonder if it's like you're witnessing somebody leaning into like the dark side, which like is seductive. Obviously, we have all this mythology about
It's
it.
cathartic.
Oh no, there's what's that
But-
relationship called? It's
Well, like
Parasocial.
Joker and Batman, right?
Yeah,
He's like,
it's,
you complete me. Without one, you don't have the other. So I do wonder about storytelling.
not a
without villains.
sympathetic relationship. What is that word? Where we just-
Parasympathetic,
not parasymbionic.
parasitic,
Symbiotic, yes.
symbiotic.
You need a symbiotic, just like you symbiotic in Rick and Morty, when Jerry and Sarah Chalk, I forgot her name in the show, but the girl that played Elliot in Scrubs, when they go to therapy and their monsters come out, I'm like, oh my god, there's a symbiotic dependency or something like that. So like
Good stuff.
when those like you need a symbiotic relationship for a good hero and villain, just like Batman and Joker. And one can argue you need a symbiotic relationship in love. You need that to play out the same way, because it ends up playing the order and madness scales very well throughout all of life.
I like that. Well, yeah, Nick, what do you think? Do you think villains are on the way out?
No, I don't necessarily think that they're on the way out. I do wonder why every villain has to be relatable. I just think that we have a relatability issue. Like there are a lot of people who are concerned about things being accessible and relatable to everybody, but sometimes it's okay to have a character that's so foreign to who you are that you can almost vicariously understand the world through their eyes. And I think that sometimes villains operate as that for the audience. A villain is thinking and doing things that most people don't think to do and don't want to do. But it is entertaining for us to see that in its sort of like purest form. And I wonder sometimes if the like sympathetic villain sort of dilutes that for us sometimes, because then it's like, well, then the villain was the friends we made along the way.
It's true. It's true. Well, you're getting
us, and it's like, I get it. Yes, that's true. But I also do want to see like a really crazy villain that does things that I would never think of.
I would say this is I would say negative Ghost Rider. I would say that this is just the way that art makes itself. For so long we had, like, think about Westerns. Right, Westerns were very black and white. You got the hero, you had the villain. The villain did stuff that you would never do. The hero would do stuff that was altruistic and self-sacrificing and all that stuff. But we played that storytelling out for so many years that people got tired of it. So right now, as far as storytelling goes, we're exploring that gray area. Once we get bored of that gray area, we'll go back to the binary of hero and villain that we're discussing right now. And I think this is
Interesting.
We'll have to.
a pattern that goes on forever, and this plays itself out true in the call and response nature of art history. Every art history or every art movement that happened was a response to the art movement that happened before it, from Renaissance to Impressionism to like Kitschism, like all of that shit that happened to modernism to postmodern art. All of this is always a back and forth. So it's a discussion that we're having with ourselves as a global community.
Consciousness.
Consciousness and art, whatever, however you want to describe it. True, very true, what you're saying. Ella. But the back and forth will go on forever, and eventually we'll get to the point where we do enjoy proper black and white villains.
I like
But
that.
right
I'd
now
listen
is not the time.
Well, I think it's interesting to look at it just from like the evolution of storytelling, right? Because like it seems to me that some of the older stories were meant to give some sort of context to scary things, right? Like the forest is scary, big animals scary, and we created creatures to sort of like help us, like Aesop's fables. You know, a lot of those stories are imparting knowledge and wisdom and stuff like that. And then you have stories that are more like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into all of that, but you know what I mean? Like there's just this weird evolution. And it's interesting to think about storytelling today and villains and heroes and whether and why we are kind of like exploring that a bit deeper. And I'm curious, like, would we go back to that binary of good, bad, just straight black and white?
Yes, because
Or
humans have perpetual amnesia and we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again.
yeah, probably. I'm just curious if there might be like some bombastic new story that pops out because we keep saying
Maybe.
we only have 7 stories, but like, how can that be? How can that be that we only have 7 basic core stories? There has to be like more for us to conceive, you know, like on a larger scale.
If a story like that comes out, we're talking something about the scale of something like heaven forbid me, I'm sorry, of a new religion or like a new Jesus story. You're talking about something that's so moving and so drastic that it changes the way that humans not only see the world, but take faith in the world. And faith is the heaviest of words that I could draw from my mind. But that's what you're alluding to. Maybe there is one, but it's going to take an apocalypse, a revelation, which is apocalypse. What that means, the like a strike of lightning of new information, of new knowledge, of new wisdom. That's what it's going to take for the world to accept it, and it takes hundreds of years for Christianity to catch on. So whenever the story comes out, the story that you're talking about, should it ever happen, there's going to be immediate repugnation of the story.
Well,
And that
I
story
guess,
is going to have to deal with some shit.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think too, though, like it's interesting to me that, so like right now, tales about quantum reality is like the big thing, right? Like interdimensions, multiverses, like that's the big thing. And while that setting is innovative, the stories themselves are nothing new. It's the same, you know, like guy likes girl, goes through multiverses to get girl. Some tragedy
Yeah.
happens, multiverse eats the person,
Ooh.
tragedy. You know, like it's the same stories. And I do wonder, like, yeah,
Is there a
what is
limitation of language? Do you think there's a limitation that we're going to run into where we can't tell a new story because we can't vocally make the sounds to tell the story that is new?
I think that no, I mean, I think even if we expanded that, I think really it has to do with sort of like human experience. I don't know that we can have stories that change things up without experiences that change things up.
What
Maybe.
does
I
this
don't know.
even look like?
I
Or
don't
what
know.
is a story that hasn't been told yet?
Right.
I mean,
Well,
you
that's
know what I
well,
mean? Like,
I know.
how do you even define
Why are you
that?
being so
That's
cynical about
nebulous.
this?
I'm
You
just
were talking
asking
He's
about
not.
because I have no,
we're
I
talking
have
about a
no idea
story
what a
that
story
defies
that doesn't
language.
exist.
Right.
We're
Well,
talking
he's
about a
asking
story
the
that
same
defies.
question I'm asking. This is just something that has always bothered me. Like, how is it that there's only 7 original stories? Like, there's
All right, Nick.
and
We
7.
reduce things.
What?
Yeah.
It's
I'm,
weird.
I'm gonna need you to come up with a new logic. I need you to come up with a new language.
A new
and then
reality.
we can discuss it.
Yeah. New reality and not even a new language. It is an interesting question because you would think that if that story did exist, it would be at least told once. And it doesn't seem to have been told ever.
And you think about those original 7 stories, a lot of them, if not all of them, are like from Shakespeare. That's one dude or Queen Elizabeth and a bunch of writers. But still, we have a whole bunch
but
of writers
those stories
now.
were being told thousands of years ago through mythology and stuff too. So it's like we've been telling these same 7 stories over and over and over and over again. And maybe it's just that we only have those 7 stories, or it's just that we've distilled all of the human experience down to a core of 7 stories. And really, that's kind of what it is, because it's not just a hero's journey. It's so many other things that are going down, but you could reduce it down to just that if you want to.
Right. That's with the quantum thing, place and setting, right? Like these are just sort of like ornaments on a tree.
And then you can shade in the colors, right? Like, so, it's like having a coloring book, and, you have a set number of colors, but you can mix the colors together. And you can create something different and new.
Okay.
I mean,
I'll play devil's advocate here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right.
Said wearing the devil's mask.
So
right.
Shocking. Hey! You're saying the quiet part out loud. Shut up. Were these stories created before the realization of quantum systems?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, creation, like, did we create quantum stuff or did we just finally observe it? Like, it gets kind of wrapped up.
Well, okay. So, like, were the stories created before the observation of quantum systems?
Yeah, I would imagine so. Well, I don't know. I mean, because then you get into like ancient civilizations and what they knew and whether or not they describe the same similar.
With respect to the evidence that we have of written history.
Oh, we can get semantic.
I
feel a semantic rabbit hole.
Listen, I'm wearing the mask of the devil, so I'm going to lay out my case like a lawyer, all right?
See how granular we can get.
Yeah, but okay, no, I'll roll with you. Okay, so yeah, like, no.
Okay, yes. So, like with regard to written history, we created these 7 stories, quote unquote, that we distilled things into before the discoverance of quantum systems. Are we all in agreement here? Or at least 2 out of 3.
The conversation, I'll just go with it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I won't answer to keep the quantum, uncertain
entanglement.
Oh, there it is. Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Yeah, you don't want to be entangled.
So.
Sorry. That was good. You're so funny. Okay.
Pretty good lawyer talk. Good job. Once we've hit the discovery of proper quantum systems, which we have not yet, then do you think that we will find new stories that we can tell based off of the discovery of quantum systems, or are we truly locked within the 7 stories?
See, I thought that the answer would be yes, but in observing all of the discussions about multiverses and stuff like that, and the fact that the storylines still hinge on human experience, and we would still be humans interacting with this new discovery, I don't know that we can escape that lens. Maybe we could. I mean, when AI stuff comes out, the AI lens is a bit different, but we still anthropomorphize AI. I still haven't figured out how we can have a singular consciousness when, AI don't have like they don't have like spatial awareness, so it wouldn't really necessarily have a sense of self. It wouldn't be the same. So I don't know. Anyway, I just thinking about that kind of stuff, I hope that we'll have more stories. I would like to see more stories, but again, it's wedded to humanity and our human experiences, which have been largely unchanged. So
Well, and that's really what it comes down to, right? It's are we said we're in an essence, are we saying can we transcend the human condition?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, that's been a question that's been asked over and over and over again. So kind of, to me, it feels like a end of history argument, right? It's like at some point we will get to the point where we can finally tell that story that we have no idea about.
Exactly.
Right,
You
right.
know?
This is it's like an N+1 argument. This is
Yeah.
what we're talking about here. If humans can ascend to a higher dimension, say like a fifth dimensional being, would we be able to tell? Sorry, strike that from the record. Would we be able to tell stories that higher dimensional beings can tell because we've been able to break out of the human condition within this plane of existence?
There's a potential, certainly, but we would never be able to tell. You know what I mean? It's like,
You don't think
so
we'd
again,
ever-
we're back in this like circular thing
So-
where it's like,
so
yeah,
you don't
we
think
potentially could, but
you
we
don't
don't
think we'll
know.
ever be able? You don't think we'll ever be able to create the technology? Human magic is scientific technology. You can't. I don't think you can argue a point against that. So you don't think we'll be able to create the technology to escape this current plane of existence?
I don't necessarily think so, because every story that we've ever told about people doing this has ended in calamity. So I think we do it to our own peril. I think there's a level of hubris to thinking that we could break reality just because we exist in it. I don't know if we're entitled to break reality. Like what gives us that entitlement? So to me, it really just feels a little bit like hubris. We're like, you know, we are hot shit because we are. Humans are hot shit, but you know, like let's have just a scotch of humility here.
Well, so you think we'll become goblins in the end run?
No, we can just stay
That-
humans.
that if we-
We don't need to be gods. We don't need to be goblins. We can just,
You don't think
No, Nick, it's gotta be
everybody-
God or Goblin.
Right.
That should have been the
So-
name of this title of this episode, is God or
That's a good
Goblin.
one.
This is
So you don't think our smartest people would go back to caves and try to create some sort of technology?
If they were Ted Kaczynski, they
no, because
Yeah,
right.
right.
Right. Well, there's that, right? There's the real chance that when you get to some of those border areas of knowledge and information, that it carries really heavy repercussions. And you know, the episode we did on Thoth and knowledge really, I think, revealed that in terms of like this law of diminishing returns. But I also do think that for scientists who are on the fringe, like the physicists that are starting to wonder if time is even real, we're a long way away from that, A, being useful, B, you know, affecting our storytelling. And because I mean, how do you tell a story with no time? I don't know that you
Right.
can. And so then if your stories are already lies from the moment you start, because they predicate on this concept that you've already decided doesn't exist apart from our singular point in space, which, as Nick has often explained, is like logistically not real, because we can't even get it and we can't perceive it with our own eyes. So then you think about us just being like brains in this weird space soup with no time, you know? I mean, like, what
So-
stories can emerge from that, really, is what I wonder.
then, if we've created every story that's ever been created, what's the point of storytelling? Why do we do it?
Because we
know.
like to hear the stories in different variations.
I just
it's
like,
a
we
circle
like
jerk.
like
your
repetition.
stories.
We're just a bunch of humans just jerking each other off. Forever.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's
We're
not-
we're jerking off monkeys, throwing our shit. I mean, like, you know, not really. But we like repetition. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with repetition.
Where's the monolith, bro?
No,
Where does it come?
there's
don't know.
nuance. There's nuance on the stories, but I do think this is a really interesting question, and it's one that I ask myself a lot as somebody who wants to write stories. I often get defeated before starting because I just think to myself, I've already heard this story. I've already heard, like, when I keep distilling it. So
But you're in
questions to
luck
ask
because
myself.
we love
Hey,
hearing
hey.
the same stories over and over again.
I know. Then I get the confidence, and I'm like,
Alright.
oh yeah, it's Same
Have
thing.
you seen Terminator 1 and 2?
Terminator. I have. I love Terminator 1
Okay,
and 2.
have you seen Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch?
I've seen Snatch, but Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, I feel like it's been far too long. My brain pooped it out a long time ago.
That's fair. There's a lot of storytellers that tell basically the same story twice. And the only thing that changes is the ornaments on the Christmas tree.
Yeah. The
But
7
it's,
trees.
yeah, it still brings people in, and it still excites humans.
Yeah. Well, and greetings and salutations, Mike. Glad that you're on the show. About goblins. As you're talking about stories, I want to share one goblin story that I did find that I kind of love. And we could probably talk about this for a lot more too. But have you guys heard of Hermitage Castle?
Mm-mm.
So there's
No, continue. Keep on.
So there's a type of goblin known as a red cap. And I guess it's like a murderous goblin, elf, or fairy found in British folklore. Nick's nodding his head. I think you mentioned them a little bit in the last episode. One of the most famous red caps of all was Robin Redcap. And it was the demonic familiar or assistant of Lord William de Soulis. And this particular red cap wreaked much harm and ruin in the lands of his master's dwelling. And this is actually a real castle. It's in Liddesdale, Scotland. It's part of a book that's all about haunted castles. But so apparently in this castle, men were murdered, women were cruelly abused, and the dark arts were practiced. So much infamy and blasphemy was said to have been committed at Hermitage Castle that the Great Stone Keep was thought to be sinking under a great weight of sin, as though the very ground wanted to hide it from the sight of God. And yet Solus, the guy who this demon was his familiar, for all the evil he wrought, he met a very horrible end. And he was taken to the 9-stane rig, a circle of stones hard by the castle. So it's like a megalithic circle. And there he was boiled to death in a great cauldron. And there's even accounts of people talking about staying in this particular castle, and that this day it has to, it gives genuine ambiance of menacing evil. And so in terms of like storytelling, we've all heard about haunted castles and haunted stories, but this one definitely stood out to me as there's so much going on and it's a real place. And it's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, castles are scary and horrible stuff happens. And you think about the concept of like the weight of the sin, you know what I mean? Like, I think this is also part of why we invent these stories, because sometimes things are just so awful. It has to transcend the human experience and start pulling in these other elements, perhaps.
Okay, where is it at? I'm down to fight some evil. You gotta go to fight some evil.
Field trip.
Fun fact about red caps too. Red caps wear red caps. They're goblins that wear red caps, but their caps start off as
like
white.
The Brits?
Huh? Yeah, like red
Brits?
hats. Yeah, like the Brits. Their hats normally start off as white though, and they slowly become red by the blood of their victims.
Ooh, awful.
Yeah, so.
Awful. And furthering that concept, right, of like the tarnishing or the, what did we call it, the decay that one falls into goblin mode.
Meh.
I love it.
Meh.
Meh.
That sounds like proper like sniper stuff. Like if I was a sniper and I would shoot somebody, then I'd pour some red dye on my hat that was white, and then I'd shoot somebody else and put some more red dye on it. Then you become like the red cap of wherever you're operating in.
So you think that the red cap goblins are like using them as like Girl Scout patches rather than it being like their corruptibility increasing?
Oh, you're so cute. Yeah, sure. We could go with that. Girl Scout
Patches.
The same as patches could be the same as war patches. But I think it's very similar where you have a rookie that goes into war, and then they end up killing the enemy multiple times, and their white cap becomes red, and that's a letter of veterancy within that enclosed social community.
Well, and it's interesting that we are now getting into like aesthetics, right? Because at the end of my research, I wanted to end with this article that was in The Guardian. And the title of the article is just the best. It's called Slobbing Out and Giving Up. Why are so many people going goblin mode?
What?
Yeah, it was talking about the concept, a hashtag called goblin mode. And it's sort of a neologism. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Newly coined word or expression for rejecting societal expectations and living in an unkempt, hedonistic manner without regard to self-image. Goblin mode. And I think this is really funny because we've talked about sort of the concept of a goblin. And here we have this article where it's talking about embracing the comforts of depravity and how it's a direct departure from cottagecore influence. So just for some of these terms, right? Cottagecore, they're saying it's like hyper curated influence of sort of like it emerged early pandemic days. So you've got like this idea of people baking bread and having their
cottagecore
little
just trad
spices.
larping.
Is what?
It's
What
trad
is this?
larping.
What is this early pandemic age? Like it was so long ago. Like it was
It's
like,
gonna be
oh,
3
back in the
years ago.
1800s, back in the early pandemic days.
Well,
this is what
time
we had
isn't
to do.
real, and it's felt long as shit. So I'm just gonna
Oh, okay,
say,
that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I'll relent. Good job.
But
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Thank you. But with goblin mode, they're talking about how it's sort of embracing the comforts of depravity. How, you don't really some people didn't have to go anywhere. Some people got to just sort of like spend the day in bed, scrolling through social media, pouring a bag of chips in your mouth, like downing Eggo toaster oven waffles with hot sauce, like
being a slob.
well, that, but also like weird snacks at odd hours of the day seem to be peak goblin mode. And so I just couldn't stop laughing about this article. It's actually kind of why I did this whole episode. Because I can't tell if I love or hate the concept. Like, and I'll get into the backwards law about why I'm wondering if this is a good thing, but have either of you gone goblin mode, and do you have regrets?
Goblin mode is a bourgeoisie leisure. Sorry, I'm not done.
We're gonna
People who have jobs and families that they have to take care of can't afford to go into goblin mode.
You're gonna have to describe.
I don't know.
goblin
I've seen
mode
a
to
lot of
me.
moms who are like, "Oh, the house is finally to myself. I should probably clean X,
Oh,
Y,
okay.
and Z."
For the 3
and then they're
hours
like,
that
"Nope,
they
I'm
don't
gonna
have
drink
chaos in their lives, yeah,
Right,
okay,
they
that's
deserve to
fine.
go goblin
Yes.
mode. I think.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. When I hear goblin mode, I assume that you're making a step, that you're going into a threshold that's like, I'm going to be bunkered in this cave for at least a week,
So,
like, at least a week.
Well, I think it emerged. They said,
Do you have something to say, Mike? Do you want to say
Yeah,
it?
a little
Go
bit.
ahead.
Just
Yeah.
a tiny bit. Oh,
you
man,
should have
interrupt.
said something.
Man, interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Y'all,
Just throwing
y'all
in on having a
marriages circle
conversation.
jerk. Are you
Go ahead.
guys enjoying it?
Yes, we're enjoying each other's conversation.
Oh, it's
Go ahead.
adorable. I love it. Like, so cute. I just want to fucking play a violin for it. Yeah, my goblin mode was
Just
running
exposed
around.
right there.
was running around LA and door dashing, doing a bunch of work during the height of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah,
and
it was
to
a
be
good time.
clear, it doesn't have to be 24/7 goblin mode. It could be like you hustled all day and then like it's 10 p.m. and you're like, I'm going to stay up until 4 a.m. and screw it. Just like go, I don't know, do what you're going to do.
I still worked until 4 a.m. It may have not have been door dashing, but it was working in a different light. But
Did you?
Whatever. I'm unclear on what you mean by goblin mode. Do you mean like if my cave is all of Los Angeles, then I'm driving around my cave and dropping off food for people and picking up other food for people. So I'm just I'm unclear on the definitions that you're using here.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit murky. Let's see here. They talk about how it's a complete lack of aesthetic because why would a goblin care what they look like?
Oh
So
yeah,
part of
no,
it's
I
an
was I
aesthetic
was
thing.
I was going out in clothes that I should have washed like a month ago. So I didn't give a shit about what I was wearing. I was just
So
working.
you, my friend, could have been said to have participated in goblin core activities,
Mhm.
to be true. But I do like this idea of the introduction of the aesthetic, right? Goblin aesthetic, non-goblin aesthetic, and the way that like you can rail against something because not only is there the cottage core, highly curated sort of aesthetic, but they also talk about the that girl aesthetic. So this could be kind of like a teen chick thing, but because it's also from TikTok and stuff.
Well, whenever I hear of that anything, I just think of Fallout, which means that they're locked in safe and they're safe.
Oh, yeah, no, I think they are talking more about here. I'll tell you. So it's okay. So there are nearly 3 billion views of videos using hashtag that girl, and many of them show influencers organizing pristine refrigerators full of freshly cut vegetables, making organic breakfasts, meditating before work, doing elaborate skin routines.
Yeah, straight. How did they pick up all of their supplies? Did they leave their house or did somebody deliver it to them?
Well, that's not
Is that unclear?
Well, it's not relevant. I'm just saying that, like, so the goblin mode is like a response to like the ideal
It's a
aesthetic.
reactionary response.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so I would say the bourgeoisie, as Nick was saying, goblin mode, quote unquote, is not a proper goblin mode. Goblins aren't bourgeoisie at all.
Well, he was referring to the concept that, like, if you were at a
If you have
certain
the
level of
leisure to sit and do
affluence,
nothing for a week, then you're
Oh,
not
that's
poor.
that's that's what goblins would call elf mode. You get a bunch of goblins to give you all your shit, and you're
There
just
you go.
chilling as an elf.
That's the Marxian elf mode.
Yes.
oh my god.
Here, I'll be a Marxist for a minute. Here.
You're right. Where's my stuff?
Hey
Okay,
man, if I'm the one dropping off your skincare treatment for your fucking Monday cucumber thing, then yeah, I'll be a Marxist for a second. It'll be fine. Don't
Well,
worry.
right. But what you're pointing out exactly kind of like what was interesting about this article is that there are a large number of people who are trying to adhere to sort of some level of perfectionism. You know, like just think of how many podcasts are like, oh, well, if you get out before, 9 a.m. and get lateral 20-degree directionality of light, and then if like at the evening you get light that's part blue, part
Optimizers.
yellow light, you're going to be better
Optimizers.
sleeping. Yeah, exactly. And so to that,
Oh,
I
yeah,
want to
those are the
introduce something else. This is the concept of the backwards law. And it's basically just this idea that the desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience. And paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is itself a positive experience. So to me, even though there's 3 billion people all about that girl, there's a small contingency that's starting to reject that and enter goblin mode, which I think is actually not a bad thing. But I don't know, because in the one hand, you're saying that you're striving for something and you're putting it external to yourself. On the other hand, you're just accepting where you are and enjoying it.
So
And from there, you might thrive.
So I think the goblin mode thing for me to me what it means that you're gonna do whatever it takes to get the job done without including anybody else. So if these people picked up whatever they needed to live their best life on their own terms, like drove their car there, grabbed the things, and then drove back, or at least were self-sufficient, the next goblin mode. Anything else is if you have to call some sort of indentured servant, some sort of serf, some sort of working class individual. That's like an elf mode sort of thing. If I may just clobber everything together within a single ideology, but it seems I feel like a little apprehensive with the description of things of like you get delivered all these things to perform something and then you get to call yourself a goblin. That's goblins have pride too.
Well, so to quote one of the folks from the article, she's saying, I will never wake up at 5 a.m. and drink green juices and be hyper organized. I will instead be in a 4 a.m. Reddit rabbit hole, Diet Coke first thing in the morning, and fistfuls of raw pasta as I snack. It's kind of like this idea of just sort of being like, screw it, and going like without any sort of maybe like
It's still reactionary though. It's reactionary to the orthodoxy. So it's not necessarily an organic idea. It's just this idea of like, I don't want to be the rise and grind person because that's fucking oversaturated on the internet, which it is.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people who want to optimize every part of their lives, and so there's going to be a contingent of people who look at that and are repulsed by it. I mean, I don't want to be that type of person.
Right. And, while that's fair, I'm just thinking about the backwards law, because that's kind of what I think is interesting, because you could want to optimize all you want, but sometimes the desire to optimize is going to lead you down the dark path that you didn't want to go. And I'm curious what you guys think about that backwards law.
Sometimes the dark path is the path you have to go down to find the proper path. But I've gone full autistic.
That's Goblin mode.
I've gone full autistic in this, and I have no idea what the fuck's going on in this conversation anymore.
Yeah, I think you got sidetracked with the bourgeoisie comment and deliveries.
I feel so prideful with the working class thing and the proletariat.
I know, buddy. I know.
I'm so sorry, but I've lost my way in the world of things.
It's totally fine. But yeah, no, in the book it's saying, and the book I'm reading from, it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And they have this little line where they said, wanting positive experience is a negative experience, accepting negative experience is a positive experience. And it's something that Alan Watts used to refer to as the backwards law. The idea that the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, as pursuing something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. And so I think that's just interesting, because it's like, while the goblin mode advocates are few and far between, there might be something there, and it might be related to the concept of the rejuvenating cave that we were talking about.
There's merit in wallowing.
There's life. It's a very Buddhist sentiment. Life is, as Alan Watts would talk about Buddhism a lot, life is full of suffering. You have to learn how to properly engage with that suffering in order to have that sort of, in order to build your bridge to nirvana. But it's rarely ever in the way that you expect it to be, which is why you were saying like the law of I'm just calling it the law of negative returns. What was it, Ayla?
Backwards law?
Backwards law, yes. Yeah, that suffering is good and pleasure is bad. There's a lot of things that there's a lot of philosophies that play out in a similar way.
Mm-hmm.
But in a sense, within the context of COVID and within the context of all the things we were talking about, the luxury of having something delivered to you so that you didn't have to step out of your house, one could argue that it was a rejection of that backwards law. And that comes from somebody who is both, like I said earlier, like he's a DoorDash during the height of the pandemic. And I also used to order things at the height of the pandemic, so I've seen both sides. it's a very fine line you're playing with morally, and
Interesting to think about, huh? It's just interesting. It's a weird
it,
article, and I was like,
it's
"This is
a
weird."
it's a pain in the ass. That's really what it is. Like it's a
Yeah.
pain in the ass to think about and deal with. But yeah, it all ends up coming down to your moral compass and what you're comfortable with and what you're not. If you're very comfortable with always getting your shit delivered, then that might be a problem. And if you're very comfortable with always delivering shit, that may not be the best thing either. There's
Nick,
a
what are
middle.
you writing? Oh,
Hmm?
sorry.
What are we talking about? Goblins and delivery systems.
Yeah, do you think goblins should deliver shit? What are
No.
goblins doing within the COVID system?
I don't
They'll
know.
just hoard everything.
No, I think there's a utility in wallowing, and it seems to me that a lot of those people who are sort of taking this reactionary goblin mode or aesthetic see the sort of indulgence in kind of wallowing in what is and what you are not. And I think that that's fine enough as sort of like a psychological salve for some people once in a while. But again, the rejuvenation of the womb has a temporal threshold. And then you sort of get corrupted by it. And, whereas licking the Cheeto dust off of your, fingers and just wiping your hands on your pants is fun for a little while. Too much indulgence and stuff like that will actually turn you into a goblin. And then you're going to be sitting there in a cave wondering why nobody wants to talk to you.
Okay, so I apologize very deeply. Because I always took that goblin mode. Being in a cave meant something similar to being as a dwarf mode, where you're always making some shit.
Oh, right.
You're always. I think I didn't spill my tequila. You're always forging something rather than sitting on your ass and wanting something to be delivered to you. So to me, goblins are equivalent to dwarves because they are very hardworking and they're making something all the time, even in their solitude.
I appreciate dwarves. I would say that Nick might have gone in dwarf mode for a little bit there, making lots of stuff.
Yeah, it's just the opposite side of like the morality thing,
Yeah,
and it's the opposite side of the productivity thing, because goblin mode is you're not doing shit. You're eating ice cream out of a fucking the same cereal bowl.
No. So in World of Warcraft, goblins are always doing something.
No, but in the context of what we're talking about with this article, the idea is that you're not doing anything.
Okay, well then fuck this article.
Okay, well that was the conversation we were having.
And we're at the end of our conversation, so it's good timing. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's like a silly article, so it's not like I'm pushing anything. I just think it's an interesting concept because it does highlight how frequently there's like aspirational content out there, and this is like a divergence to just say like, no, we're just gonna own goblin mode, and it's an interesting concept to think about goblins and then think about this sort of like 2022 concept of goblin personnel or goblin like activity or something like that.
Hashtag goblins did nothing wrong. They're not sitting around making they're not waiting for ice cream. They're forging shit. They're doing things. I don't know what weird thing all this goblin lore came from in common time, but it is not true to at least World of Warcraft lore with goblins.
Well, I think you're going to need to write an article to The Guardian and let them know that they totally got this wrong.
No, I'm
do like a hashtag and be like,
I'm the type of guy that would just buy The Guardian and then figure it out later.
There you go. Or start a new trend, like hashtag real goblins. Or so, I don't know. But anyway, that's all I got for tonight. I thought this was kind of a fun episode, and thanks so much for indulging me in goblin lore. Yeah, it's fun.
Thanks, Ayla.
Thank
Very
you.
nice.
Goblins are better than dwarves. Let me just tell you.
Oh boy.
Fight me, Nick.
I
Fight
don't know.
me.
I'm good.
That mask's getting to you, man. It's absorbing
Thanks,
you.
guys. We appreciate all of you out there. Let us know what you think about goblins and dwarves and all of those spooky things that go
All of
bump
y'all are
in the
just
night.
caricatures. I'm trying to dive back into the Twilight Zone mask. I'm like,
Mm.
7 stories.
go on, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
You're good, you're good.
No, yeah, thanks, guys. We appreciate you tuning in. Thanks to Ayla, and thank you to Mike, and thank you to Big Mike out there for also commenting and checking us out tonight. We appreciate you. If you want to check us out, we are on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Verbal, and Odyssey.
And Planet
yes.
Jupiter Radio.
Okay, and Planet Jupiter Radio, all at Exofathom. You can go check us out there. Please give us a thumbs up and a subscription. It would really help us out. You can also check out the family of podcasts we do over at Think Ring Talks on Facebook, where you get Keelan with If Numbers Could Talk on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. We have Dijon the Mustard. He has a Twitch channel called Strawberries and Coffee at Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10:30 p.m. You can also check out Screen Time Continuum Wednesdays and Sundays at 8:30 p.m. And let's see, This Married Moment Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. to noon. And of course, Friday night here at Exofathom. Yeah, I think that's it for us, guys. So thank you again. And until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good.
Should I give a preview?
Oh, yes. Mike, what are we going to talk about next week?
Archangels.
Awesome.
All right. So stay tuned and check us out next week, 8 p.m. for a talk on Archangels. Thanks, guys. Good night.
Peace.
Later.